Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the person you trusted most, and Elizabeth Donovan learned that truth in the most brutal way imaginable. In the gilded towers of Manhattan's elite, she had once stood beside her husband, Alexander. Donovan hailed as one of the city's most powerful self-made millionaires. From private jets to diamond-drenched galas, their love story had all the markings of a modern fairy tale, until it unraveled behind closed doors. When Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant, she believed it would be the turning point, the salvation of their strained marriage. But instead of joy, she was met with cold indifference, and soon after with a mistress. Alexander's betrayal wasn't quiet. It was public, brutal, and humiliating. Headlines screamed, rumors swirled, and as he paraded his new lover through Europe's most extravagant playgrounds, Elizabeth was left to navigate heartbreak and pregnancy alone. But the story didn't end there. Just when the world expected her to disappear, Elizabeth emerged not as a victim, but as a storm. Arm in arm with Damon Blackwood, Alexander's most ruthless business rival, she stepped into the spotlight once more, this time not as a wife, but as a woman reclaiming her voice. And when Alexander saw her at a gala, glowing and proud, the control he had once wielded shattered. What follows is a tale of revenge, woven through courtrooms and ballrooms of power plays, cloaked in designer suits, and of a woman who refused to be discarded. In a city built on image and empire, Elizabeth will fight not only for justice, but for herself and the future of her child. Because some betrayals spark tears, others ignite wars. And this war is personal. Alexander Donovan was the quintessential self-made titan, a man whose name was often mentioned in the same breath as Elon Musk or Bernard Arnault. He built an empire of luxury hotels, couture boutiques, and high-end real estate ventures, each bearing the Donovan crest in glimmering gold. Beneath the crisp designer suits and the suave public persona, however, lay a cold ambition that many suspected was fueled by little more than ego and greed. His gaze, a penetrating shade of grey, had once captivated Elizabeth Hughes, soon to become Elizabeth Donovan. She hailed from a modest upbringing in upstate New York, never imagining she would rub shoulders with the city's elite. They first met at a charity auction hosted by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where Alexander's magnetic presence and philanthropic gestures made him the evening star attraction. Elizabeth was overwhelmed yet enchanted by the sophisticated world he introduced her to, from posh art galleries to secretive members-only clubs. Their courtship was both swift and intense. Alexander swept Elizabeth into a whirlwind of romantic gestures that left her breathless weekend getaways on private jets, front-row seats at exclusive fashion shows, and sparkling jewels that symbolized promises she was certain he would keep. She believed that beneath Alexander's seemingly aloof exterior, there was a nurturing soul who would cherish her. Their wedding was a grand affair in an ornate cathedral, attended by a who's who of Manhattan's high society. Elizabeth felt like she was living a fairy tale, even if she occasionally noticed fleeting moments where Alexander's eyes flashed with a distant coolness. Still, she reasoned that the pressures of his business empire explained his detachment. Once the dust settled, once his empire stabilized, they would find time for each other. In the first months of marriage, Elizabeth tried to be the dutiful spouse in every sense, attending black tie events on Alexander's arm, learning how to host lavish dinner parties, keeping up with conversations about mergers, acquisitions, and stock portfolios. She believed it was her role to support him as he navigated the cutthroat corporate world. But Alexander's gentle gestures soon faded, replaced by late-night phone calls, endless business meetings, and clandestine dinners with potential investors. Elizabeth spent more time alone in their sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, haunted by a sense that something vital was slipping away. Yet she maintained hope that once he achieved his latest business goals, his attention would return to her. When Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant, hope bloomed anew. She dreamt of how a child would unite them, how the patter of little feet would melt the ice in Alexander's veins. Heart hammering with both excitement and nervousness, she broke the news to him one morning over breakfast. For a fraction of a second, she saw genuine surprise in his eyes, a glimmer of what might have been joy. But the emotion vanished as quickly as it appeared. He simply nodded, muttered something about scheduling an appointment, and returned to scanning stock reports. Elizabeth told herself that his subdued reaction was simply his way. Surely he needed time to process the idea of fatherhood. Over the next few weeks, she tried to be patient, resisting the urge to press him for emotional displays he seemed incapable of giving. Yet every day, rumors trickled in through the city's gossip grapevine sightings of Alexander, with a mysterious red-haired beauty at upscale restaurants, a lingering perfume on his suit jacket that was most certainly not Elizabeth's. One night, after hours of tossing and turning in an empty bed, Elizabeth confronted him. He returned home around midnight, his expression distant and his eyes rimmed with fatigue or perhaps guilt. She voiced her suspicions, her voice trembling with heartbreak. Instead of denial or remorse, he responded with frosty annoyance. He accused her of paranoia, dismissed the rumors as trivial chatter from bored socialites. Still, the fleeting scent of someone else's perfume clung to him like an accusation he refused to acknowledge. Determined to find answers, Elizabeth checked his phone records, a violation of trust she never imagined doing. That was when she found the name Fiona McKay, an up-and-coming fashion designer, recently seen parading the runways of Milan, rumored to have a string of wealthy benefactors behind her budding brand. The calls, the text messages, even suspicious restaurant reservations, all pointed to an affair that Alexander barely bothered to hide. When she confronted him again this time, in tears, Alexander unleashed the brutal truth. He no longer wished to continue this farce of a marriage, as he coldly called it. Though he insisted he would still provide for her and the baby, the notion of love or loyalty never crossed his lips. His words hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest, shattering every illusion she'd held on to. Just like that, the foundations of her world collapsed. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and married to a man who cared more about maintaining his image and indulging in his new mistress than protecting his family. Alexander Donovan, once the glittering savior of her romantic dreams, had become the ruthless tycoon. He was rumored to be a man who would discard anyone once they stopped being of use. In the days that followed, Elizabeth's despair became more public as tabloids seized upon the scandal. Headlines screamed of the pregnant wife left behind, pitting her against Fiona McKay in sensational stories that reduced Elizabeth to a pitiful figure. On social media, strangers speculated about her mental state, while paparazzi camped outside the penthouse, waiting for any glimpse of her tears. She felt utterly alone until her best friend Amanda Sterling intervened, offering a safe haven away from the flash of cameras. Though her heart ached with betrayal, Elizabeth discovered a spark of determination flickering within her. She found a tenacious attorney in Harriet Caldwell, who was eager to defend her rights as the wronged spouse, and even more eager to ensure she received fair child support. Slowly, Elizabeth began to see that Alexander's cruelty might not only be his downfall, there was another figure looming in the background, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His name was Damon Blackwood, Alexander's fiercest business rival. Unbeknownst to Elizabeth, Damon was carefully watching the unraveling Donovan empire, discreetly planning his next move. And in Elizabeth, he saw both a woman in need of help and a strategic linchpin in toppling the arrogant magnate who had once humiliated him in the boardroom. Little did Elizabeth know her greatest heartbreak would soon usher her into the center of a power struggle between two of the city's wealthiest titans, and in doing so, set in motion a chain of events that would bring both her heartbreak and her triumph to the world's stage. Not long after Elizabeth moved in with Amanda, she found herself haunted by her decision to abandon the penthouse. Yet returning to that marble mausoleum felt impossible. She couldn't bear the idea of sharing space with Alexander's memory and the lingering traces of Fiona's presence. Even so, she worried endlessly about the future, her baby's future in particular. Alexander was swift in sending legal documents to formally end their marriage. The speed of it astonished Elizabeth, who was only just beginning to grapple with her pregnancy. His lawyer called Harriet Caldwell, proposing a hefty financial settlement in exchange for Elizabeth's silence and cooperation. Alexander wished to wash his hands of the entire marriage, it seemed, and focus solely on Fiona McKay and his unstoppable corporate ambitions. "Are you willing to accept a settlement?" Harriet asked, her pen poised over a legal pad. A veteran in New York's high-stakes divorces, Harriet wore sharp suits and exuded a confidence that Elizabeth yearned to emulate. Elizabeth swallowed hard. "I don't care about his money," she replied quietly, then placed a hand on her stomach. "I just want my child to be safe. But I also won't let Alexander walk away from his responsibilities." Harriet offered a small smile. "Then we'll ensure he doesn't. Adultery is a legitimate factor, and if he fights us, we fight back with everything we have. Photographic evidence, witness testimonies, you name it. In the media, the scandal only grew worse. Photos surfaced of Alexander and Fiona vacationing on a private yacht off the coast of Cannes, her stunning figure draped in a designer bikini while he sipped champagne in the sun. The tabloids had a field day contrasting these images with snapshots of a solemn, pregnant Elizabeth leaving a prenatal clinic. Public sympathy began to tilt in Elizabeth's favor, though she had little sense of victory in it. As for Damon Blackwood, his name cropped up in discreet corners of conversation. Amanda, whose interior design clients included some of Damon's associates, warned Elizabeth that Damon had a reputation for exploiting the weak spots of his competitors. Rumor had it he'd once orchestrated a hostile takeover of a tech startup that Alexander had been eyeing, forcing Alexander to cede control in a bitter deal. The two men had harbored a mutual disdain ever since their rivalry morphing into a personal vendetta. "Damon's no Saint Amanda," cautioned Elizabeth one evening. "He might see you as a tool to get back at Alexander." Elizabeth bit her lip. "If he does, I won't allow it. But he's already reached out to Harriet offering support for my legal case information on Alexander's assets, potential loopholes we could exploit." Amanda shrugged. "Then use him if you must. But keep your guard up, Liz. You've had enough heartbreak for a lifetime." Despite Amanda's caution, Elizabeth couldn't help but feel a flicker of relief at Damon's involvement. She was cornered, her resources limited, and Harriet's strategy depended heavily on forcing Alexander to negotiate in good faith. If Damon had the inside scoop on Alexander's corporate vulnerabilities, it might tip the scales in Elizabeth's favor. So when Damon invited her to lunch at an upscale hotel restaurant under the guise of discussing mutually beneficial matters, she agreed, nerves fluttering in her stomach. Damon proved to be every bit as charismatic as Alexander, yet his demeanor was tempered by a calm self-assurance rather than icy arrogance. He greeted Elizabeth politely, pulling out a chair for her, his dark eyes scrutinizing her with a mixture of curiosity and empathy. She sensed a shrewd mind behind that cordial exterior. Over a light meal, they talked about her legal proceedings, her anxiety over the baby, and Alexander's public displays with Fiona. "You might wonder why I'm helping you," Damon said at one point, swirling the sparkling water in his glass. "Let's just say your husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, has crossed me more than once. If there's any justice to be served here, I'd prefer it be delivered by you." Elizabeth exhaled slowly. "I don't want revenge," she said, voice trembling with emotion she tried to control. "I just want out of this nightmare. I want to protect my child." His gaze softened. "That's understandable. In this city, though, protecting yourself often means fighting back, and sometimes you need powerful allies to do so." She studied him for a moment. "Are you offering me an alliance?" He inclined his head. "Call it what you will. I have resources, influence, and an entire network of people who'd be more than happy to see Alexander Donovan taken down a peg or two. If helping you ensures that outcome, then we both get what we want." When she left that lunch, Elizabeth felt oddly reassured. Damon's motives might not be purely altruistic, but his offer gave her a crucial lifeline. It wasn't long before she found herself relying on the information his network provided, from leaked financial documents to whispers about disgruntled shareholders in Donovan Enterprises. Bit by bit, Harriet Caldwell amassed a sturdy case against Alexander, one that would ensure Elizabeth not only received fair support, but also retained custody rights that Alexander couldn't easily challenge. Alexander, however, was not one to fold so quickly. He fought back through legal motions, attempting to paint Elizabeth as mentally unstable due to the stress of her pregnancy. His attorneys hinted that if she was too fragile, perhaps custody of the child should go to a more capable parent, namely Alexander himself. The irony was staggering. Even as he flaunted Fiona McKay on the covers of tabloid magazines, he had the gall to challenge Elizabeth's fitness as a mother. That's when the whispers began surfacing about Fiona's less-than-glamorous business dealings. Gossip surfaced of investor fraud, shady accounting, and double-dealing with suppliers in Europe. Damon's grin when he relayed the rumors to Elizabeth was borderline predatory. He sensed blood in the water. And if the allegations held true, it could force Alexander into an even worse position, publicly and corporately. Still nothing compared to the bombshell that would drop a few weeks later, an invitation to the Black and White Ball, an extravagant annual event thrown by Damon Blackwood himself. With the city abuzz over the scandal, Damon's ball offered a perfect stage to unveil shifting alliances and to show Alexander Donovan that his discarded wife was far from alone. When the gilt-edged invitation arrived at Amanda's apartment, Elizabeth felt her stomach twist. Attending that ball as Damon's guest would be a statement, a declaration that she no longer cowered in Alexander's shadow. "Are you ready for that kind of spotlight?" Amanda asked, helping Elizabeth sort through potential gowns that could accommodate her growing baby bump. Elizabeth took a moment to breathe, pressing a hand lightly against her abdomen. She recalled nights of heartbreak, days of vicious rumors, and the dawning realization that she needed to stand up for herself and her child. "I'm tired of hiding," she answered softly. "If Alexander wants to push me into a corner, he'll have to see that I won't stay there quietly." Thus, as the countdown to the Black and White Ball began, the stage was set. Elizabeth bolstered by Damon's protection, and Harriet's legal acumen prepared to face Alexander in a public arena for the first time since he had turned his back on her. In the swirling chaos of Manhattan's most elite gathering secrets would be exposed rivalries ignited, and one pregnant woman's resolve would be tested like never before. The gossip mill churned at full tilt as the Black and White Ball approached. Who would accompany whom? Which fashion icons would dazzle onlookers with bespoke gowns? More importantly, would Alexander Donovan and his controversial mistress, Fiona McKay, dare to show their faces at the event hosted by Damon Blackwood? For her part, Elizabeth stood before a mirror in Amanda's apartment, wearing a flowing black gown that gracefully embraced her baby bump. Amanda, an interior designer with a keen eye for aesthetics, had helped modify the dress to ensure it balanced elegance with comfort. Elizabeth's heart pounded at the thought of stepping back into the public eye, especially when the public was ravenous for more drama in the cold millionaire dumps pregnant wife saga. Amanda fussed over the final touches. "You look stunning," she pronounced, fastening a simple diamond necklace around Elizabeth's neck. "Understated, but regal, exactly the vibe you need." Elizabeth took a steadying breath. "I just hope I can hold it together if I see them," she murmured, referencing Alexander and Fiona. "Every time I think about what he's done, how he's treated me." She trailed off, tears threatening. Amanda placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have every right to be angry, but tonight you show them you're more than their gossip. You're strong, and you're not afraid." Soon a limousine arrived, courtesy of Damon Blackwood. The driver helped Elizabeth inside, whisking her away to one of Manhattan's most luxurious hotels, where the ball's grand ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and gilded accents. A hush seemed to settle over the crowd. The moment she stepped onto the red carpet with Damon by her side, photographers scrambling to capture the moment. For the first time, Elizabeth felt the exhilarating mix of nerves and defiance that came from deliberately entering the lion's den. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with sophistication and a palpable tension. Socialites, business magnates, and minor royalty from overseas sipped champagne in tuxedos and designer gowns. Elizabeth was keenly aware of the eyes following her. Some gazes were curious, others pitying, and still others resentful, especially from those who sided with Alexander or saw her as an opportunist. She clung to Damon's arm, determined not to falter. Damon greeted several high-profile investors with smooth confidence, subtly positioning Elizabeth as a respected ally. He introduced her to individuals who, under normal circumstances, might have snubbed a social outsider. Yet the scandal and her new affiliation with Damon gave her an air of intrigue, and many were eager to glean tidbits of insider information. Amid the swirl of music and hushed conversations, Fiona McKay made her entrance. Dressed in a bold, skin-tight white gown with plunging lines, she soaked up the limelight, tossing her fiery red hair and flashing provocative smiles to the press. Whispers indicated she'd come alone, no Alexander in sight. Elizabeth felt a clench in her stomach at the woman who had so effortlessly dismantled her marriage. Then, like a thunderbolt, Alexander Donovan swept into the ballroom. He wore a severe black tuxedo, exuding an air of command. Heads turned in his wake. Although he and Fiona arrived separately, it took mere seconds for Fiona to sashay across the room, loop her arm through his, and present herself as his chosen companion. The cameras flashed with renewed frenzy. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop several degrees as Alexander's gaze locked on Damon and on Elizabeth. A small crowd parted as though anticipating an altercation. Elizabeth's pulse hammered. She was close enough to see the tension rippling in Alexander's clenched jaw, the way his eyes flicked over her gown, then her belly, and finally the protective hand Damon rested on her back. Fiona, standing at Alexander's side, watched with a condescending curl of her lip. Damon broke the silence, offering Alexander a cordial yet pointed smile. "Donovan, I'm glad you decided to show." Alexander's voice was a cool blade. "I wouldn't miss one of your spectacles, and I see you've come with my—" He paused, glancing at Elizabeth's pregnant form. "My wife." Before Damon could respond, Elizabeth spoke up, summoning every ounce of courage. "Ex-wife." Soon enough, she corrected him quietly. "I assume you've brought Fiona to celebrate." That Fiona's grin hardened, but she recovered quickly. "Such a shame," she purred, leaning closer to Alexander, "that you couldn't maintain your husband's interest." If you had, maybe you wouldn't be playing arm candy for his rival. A flush of anger shot through Elizabeth, but Damon was quicker to respond. If anyone here is arm candy, he said, his tone laced with a mocking edge. It's the woman who traded up from sponsor to sponsor until she found one wealthy enough to fund her entire lifestyle. Fiona's cheeks flared. Alexander's eyes narrowed, fists clenched at his side. For a tense moment, Elizabeth braced for an explosive scene, but the presence of cameras and wealthy donors held them all in check. Instead, Alexander took Fiona's arm and escorted her away with cold precision. "You all right?" Damon asked, once they were gone, a concerned furrow on his brow. Elizabeth realized she was trembling. She nodded and forced a steady breath, refusing to let tears fall. What none of them anticipated was the abrupt arrival of a man wearing an official armband that read, "Investigations." He quietly approached Fiona, handing her an envelope, then walked away before the tabloids could swarm him. The entire exchange lasted seconds, but the shock on Fiona's face spoke volumes. She practically ripped open the envelope eyes, scanning whatever lay inside. Although she tried to mask her reaction, a flicker of panic contorted her beautiful features. The drama had begun. Soon rumors rippled through the ballroom like wildfire. Had Fiona been subpoenaed? Was she under investigation for fraud? The hush around her deepened into suspicious stares. Alexander escorted her to a corner, their conversation an urgent whisper. Camera flashes sparked anew, capturing each moment of her distress. Meanwhile, Damon guided Elizabeth away from the epicenter of scandal. "Come," he said, "let's step onto the balcony. You need some fresh air." They slipped outside to a secluded terrace, where the cacophony of the ballroom was muffled behind glass doors. City lights stretched out beneath them, the hum of traffic filling the night. Elizabeth gripped the balustrade, forcing herself to release the tension coiled inside her like a spring. "You did well," Damon said softly, standing next to her. "You showed up, faced him, faced both of them, and held your ground." Elizabeth laughed shakily, the sound tinged with both relief and sorrow. "I'm not sure how I'll ever get used to this world. It's so cutthroat, so calculating." Damon's expression turned pensive. "You're right to be wary, but you're stronger than you realize. You've come this far despite everything Alexander threw at you." She let the night air calm her nerves, feeling the baby shift in her womb, a reminder of the life she carried. "I appreciate everything you've done," she said, "even if it is partly to bring Alexander down." Damon nodded, unashamed. "I won't lie to you. Hurting Alexander is a bonus. But I also see someone who's been wronged, someone who deserves better than to be cast aside. And I'm not above mixing a little justice with business." Elizabeth could have sworn she saw a flicker of genuine kindness in his dark eyes. The man who towered at her side was a cunning rival to her husband. Yes, but there was also a hint of empathy in his tone. Perhaps that was the real difference between him and Alexander. Damon could still feel empathy, whereas Alexander seemed to have buried his long ago. After a few quiet moments, they returned inside. Alexander and Fiona were nowhere in sight. Rumor had it they'd left early, Fiona seething over whatever official notice she'd received. The ball, meanwhile, resumed its glittering coarse string music, champagne toasts and laughter from those blissfully ignorant of the power plays unfolding in the corners of the room. For Elizabeth, the night concluded with a swirl of emotions. She had confronted her estranged husband, witnessed the first public crack in Fiona's armor, and solidified her alliance with Damon Blackwood. Perhaps the biggest surprise of all was that she felt an unaccustomed lightness as she stepped back into the limo. No, the battle wasn't over. But for the first time, she believed she had a fighting chance, both in court and in the court of public opinion. Outside New York City glittered like the star of its own show, and Elizabeth allowed herself a moment of optimism. She might be bruised by betrayal, but she was not broken. The next moves belonged to Alexander and Fiona, and whether they knew it or not, they were teetering on an edge. The Donovan Empire was not as unassailable as Alexander believed, and Elizabeth was no longer the shy, uncertain girl who first fell under his spell. Beneath the glittering veneer of Manhattan's elite, Elizabeth discovered a labyrinth of alliances more complex than she had ever imagined. Damon Blackwood was her guide, a man who knew precisely which levers to pull, which connections to exploit, and which rumors to stoke. With his mentorship, Elizabeth began to hold her head high among socialites and power brokers who once dismissed her as merely Alexander Donovan's trophy wife. Her pregnancy progressed into the second trimester. Despite her emotional turbulence, Elizabeth found solace in prenatal yoga classes and regular checkups. A sense of fierce protectiveness for her child took root in her heart. Although Damon offered to accompany her to the hospital on more than one occasion, his busy schedule and Elizabeth's own uncertainty made most visits solitary affairs. Still, he never failed to send thoughtful gestures, a chauffeured car, a bouquet of lilies, or a warm message of encouragement. Alexander Donovan, by contrast, seemed more consumed by revenge. Furious that Elizabeth had appeared at the black and white ball with Damon, he ramped up the legal pressure, directing his attorneys to challenge her every claim. In turn, Harriet Caldwell used Damon's insider information to reveal hidden Donovan assets and questionable business dealings, strengthening Elizabeth's position for a fair settlement. The press, hungrier than ever for updates, breathlessly reported every thrust and parry in the Donovan versus Donovan divorce saga. Meanwhile, Fiona McKay found her empire under siege. Investors started backing out of her fashion line, spooked by whispers of fraud. Magazine editors, once enthralled by her glamorous persona, or distanced themselves to avoid complicity in potential financial scandals. Fiona's brand built on spectacle, and rumored backdoor deals wobbled on unsteady footing. For the first time, Elizabeth witnessed the cracks forming in the facade that had stolen her husband's affections. Yet it was Damon who orchestrated a quieter, more profound shift against Alexander. Through well-placed rumors and strategic conversations, he chipped away at the confidence of Donovan Enterprises' key stakeholders. Some parted ways, unwilling to be associated with the swirl of scandal. The company's share prices dipped, and the board of directors grew restless. Alexander, once revered for his business acumen, found himself fending off questions about whether his personal life had compromised his leadership. In the midst of these undercurrents, Damon invited Elizabeth to a private dinner, ostensibly to discuss new evidence Harriet might use in court. The venue, an exclusive rooftop restaurant boasting panoramic views of the city. Soft candlelight and the hum of low conversation made the atmosphere intimate. Elizabeth arrived feeling wary but determined not to appear skittish. She wore a flowing ivory dress, tailored to her figure, her baby bump, now unmistakable. Damon greeted her warmly, standing to pull out her chair. "You look radiant," he said, his voice subdued yet sincere. Elizabeth felt a flutter of nerves. This was a far cry from the formal negotiations of the past. Despite her misgivings, she had to admit that Damon's presence provided a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. They spoke first of legal matters, depositions, financial disclosures, and possible settlement figures. The conversation then drifted to more personal topics: childhood dreams, the pressures of high society, and how both had navigated the pitfalls of wealth. Elizabeth found herself surprised by how disarmingly candid Damon could be, mentioning his own regrets and ambitions with a quiet intensity. As dessert arrived, a decadent soufflé, Damon leaned forward, his dark eyes studying Elizabeth. "You've changed," he remarked softly. "When I first met you, you seemed fragile. Now you carry yourself differently." Elizabeth lowered her gaze, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I've had to learn to be strong. My child deserves that." Silence hung between them for a moment, weighted but not uncomfortable. A question shimmered in the air. Was this a calculated move by Damon to win Elizabeth's trust, or an authentic moment of connection? Elizabeth felt her pulse quicken at the thought of letting her guard down further. She had been hurt once. Deeply could she risk entangling herself with another powerful man whose motives weren't entirely clear. Just then, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen to see multiple news alerts. With an apologetic look, she opened one. Damon's phone beeped almost simultaneously. They both read in growing astonishment. Fiona McKay's label had just been served a lawsuit by a group of international investors citing fraud and breach of contract. The potential financial damages ran into tens of millions. Damon exhaled, setting his device aside. "This is bigger than I expected," he muttered. "If Fiona's wrongdoing is traced back to Donovan Enterprises' funding, Alexander could be in serious legal jeopardy too." Elizabeth stared at him, a swirl of conflicting emotions in her chest. On the one hand, there was a grim satisfaction seeing the mistress who had torpedoed her marriage face consequences. On the other, she felt a pang of empathy for Alexander, futile though it might be. Their child would be born into a legacy defined by scandal, corporate warfare, and betrayal. Damon seemed to read the turmoil in her expression. "Look, you're free to withdraw from this if it's getting too ugly," he said gently. "But this might be the break that ensures you receive the settlement and custody arrangements you deserve. Alexander's going to be too busy fighting off one crisis after another to mount a serious challenge." Elizabeth pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling the baby shift. "I need security," she whispered more to herself than to Damon. "And I need peace." He nodded. "Then let's see this through." Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the rooftop terrace. The distant lights of the city offered a dreamlike panorama, a reminder that New York's relentless energy could consume anyone. Yet Elizabeth found a flicker of hope. Perhaps she could carve out a quiet life for herself and her child amidst all this chaos. And if Damon played a role in securing that future, maybe she could accept his help without losing herself in the bargain. By the time dinner ended, the lines of their alliance had solidified further. Elizabeth had not promised Damon anything beyond gratitude and cooperation, but a small flame of trust glowed between them. Whether that flame could endure the storms on the horizon was another question entirely. The evening of the charity gala arrived cloaked in opulence and whispered tension. Manhattan's elite had gathered under a glittering sky, where crystal chandeliers danced with candlelight and gossip hung in the air like perfume. The event, held at the historic Astoria Grand Hotel, promised glamour for a noble cause, raising funds for pediatric health care. But everyone knew the real attraction of the night wasn't just philanthropy. It was drama. Elizabeth stood before the mirror in her dressing room, heart pounding. She wore a breathtaking teal gown that flowed like silk water over her curves, cinched just above the gentle swell of her stomach. Amanda had tailored it meticulously, ensuring it embraced her pregnancy without diminishing her elegance. Her makeup was soft but deliberate, and her hair swept into a loose chignon strands, framing her face like wisps of strength. "You're luminous," Amanda whispered, as she fastened a delicate necklace around Elizabeth's collarbone. "He won't know what hit him." Elizabeth gave a soft smile, but said nothing. The thought of seeing Alexander again, after all the humiliation, The betrayal, the threats stirred a maelstrom inside her. But she wasn't the same woman who had once waited by the window for his return. Tonight, she was walking into the lion's den, not as prey, but as someone who had learned to roar. Damon Blackwood arrived promptly, clad in a sharp black tuxedo with subtle silver detailing. He exuded a quiet authority that turned heads the moment he entered a room. He didn't say much when he saw Elizabeth, only held out his arm, his gaze warm with silent approval. The car ride to the gala was filled with stillness, but not discomfort. Damon's presence was grounding like a silent wall between her and the chaos of the world. As the limousine pulled up to the Astoria, the flashes of photographers illuminated the night like lightning. The media was already there, primed for scandal, and Elizabeth knew she would be front-page news by morning. She stepped out gracefully, clutching Damon's arm, her posture tall and composed. The moment her feet touched the red carpet, a hush rippled through the crowd. Flashes burst like fireworks, murmurs swelled, cameras zoomed. That's her, Alexander's ex. She's glowing. Is that Damon Blackwood? Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric. Golden light spilled from chandeliers, music drifted from a grand piano in the corner, and waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. The city's wealthiest patrons mingled, laughed, and stole curious glances at Elizabeth and her escort. Damon handled it with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries with old rivals, and making introductions that placed Elizabeth firmly within his sphere. "She looks incredible," someone whispered near the bar. "I can't believe she's showing her face after all that." And with him. But Elizabeth didn't flinch. Her eyes scanned the room like a radar searching for the storm behind the curtain. And then he appeared. Alexander Donovan entered like a thunderclap. Impeccably dressed in a charcoal black tuxedo, hair slicked back, jaw tight, he surveyed the room with the cool precision of a predator. Whispers erupted instantly. No Fiona McKay, no dazzling redhead at his side. Just Alexander, alone, coiled like a viper. Their eyes met across the ballroom. His gaze narrowed the moment he saw Elizabeth, then flicked to the hand. Damon rested lightly on her back. A muscle twitched in Alexander's jaw. He looked away, but not before she caught the flicker of something primal beneath the ice rage, jealousy, regret. The crowd seemed to shift in anticipation as the space between them narrowed. Damon, sensing the inevitability, steered Elizabeth gracefully through the room. She shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, but her mind was anchored to one inevitable confrontation. It happened near the champagne fountain. Alexander approached with silent intensity, flanked by no one, his glass of whiskey barely touched. He stopped just short of them, and the ambient music seemed to soften, as if yielding to the moment. "Elizabeth," he said, voice low. Taut like a string pulled too tight. Then turning stiffly, he added, "Blackwood." Donovan Damon replied coolly, his expression unreadable. The three stood locked in a silent triangle. The crowd pretended not to watch, but every glance was tilted in their direction, ears strained to catch even a syllable. "You've grown quite bold," Alexander continued, eyes raking over Elizabeth's gown, then pausing at her baby bump. "Parading yourself from one event to the next." "I suppose you enjoy the attention." Elizabeth took a slow breath. "I'm attending a charity gala, Alexander. Not everything is about you." His smirk was brittle. "You used to be more discreet. Now you flaunt yourself on the arm of my enemy." "She's not flaunting anything," Damon said, calmly stepping slightly closer. "She's standing in her own light, something you tried to smother." Alexander's eyes snapped to him. "You think this is victory? You think aligning yourself with her makes you better than me? I don't need to think it. Damon replied. "I just need to watch you unravel." Before Alexander could respond, a ripple of motion broke the scene. A man in a dark suit, carrying an envelope, stamped with an official seal, stepped forward and wordlessly handed it to a wide-eyed server, who in turn passed it to Alexander. Elizabeth recognized the insignia immediately. Legal papers, possibly a subpoena, maybe even the beginning of an indictment. Alexander opened it quickly, face paling. His hand gripped the paper with growing tension, eyes scanning the lines. For the first time, he looked shaken. Truly, visibly shaken. The moment stretched. Fiona's name must have been there. Maybe bank transactions, evidence. Whatever it was, it hit hard. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stalked off, leaving a hushed silence in his wake. The tension broke like glass. Elizabeth exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. Damon's hand stayed at her back, steadying her. "You all right?" he asked. "I will be," she murmured, gazing toward the ballroom doors where Alexander had vanished. "I think he finally understands what it means to lose." Damon gave a half smile, eyes crinkling. "He underestimated you." As the night went on, Elizabeth mingled with quiet grace, her every step now lighter. She'd walked into that ballroom with fear, but was leaving with something else, entirely power. Not the loud kind, but the kind forged from surviving something meant to destroy you. By the time they left the gala, Manhattan was cloaked in stillness. In the back seat of the limousine, Elizabeth gazed out the window as city lights blurred into constellations. "You were brilliant tonight," Damon said. She turned to him, a trace of a smile forming. "Thank you for standing by me." "I didn't stand by you," he replied. "I followed your lead." The city hummed with distant horns and quiet promise as they drove through the night. Elizabeth leaned back in her seat, one hand resting gently on her belly, the other holding her future firm. In the weeks that followed, the Donovan scandal detonated in a public spectacle far more explosive than any tabloid had anticipated. Investigations into Fiona McKay's fashion empire uncovered a web of falsified sales figures, offshore accounts, and suspicious loans. Not all of these loans could be traced directly to Donovan Enterprises, but there were enough financial entanglements to drag Alexander into the mess. Suddenly, the man who once seemed invincible faced a perfect storm of legal and corporate backlash. Shareholders questioned his leadership, citing damaged brand reputation and declining stock prices. Damon Blackwood quietly but effectively used his network to sow further doubt among potential investors, underlining Donovan's personal scandals as red flags. One by one, major partners withdrew, leaving the once mighty Donovan empire teetering on the brink. Elizabeth, for her part, focused on the imminent birth of her child. With Harriet Caldwell's expert guidance, she navigated the final stages of her divorce. The case was bolstered by an avalanche of negative press surrounding Alexander. He could hardly argue for custody when the court of public opinion regarded him as a man who abandoned his pregnant wife for a mistress now embroiled in fraud. Under pressure, Alexander's lawyers finally offered Elizabeth a settlement that guaranteed her financial security for life, along with generous child support. Harriet accepted on her behalf, ensuring every term was legally binding. Still, Elizabeth felt little triumph in signing those documents. The heartbreak of betrayal couldn't be erased by a bank statement. She did, however, feel a strange sense of relief, an unshackling of her spirit. With the divorce settled, she could bring her child into the world without the constant threat of Alexander's interference. Meanwhile, Alexander faced an emergency board meeting that would decide his fate as CEO. The board, increasingly alarmed by rumors of misappropriation, demanded answers. Legal subpoenas flew targeting not just Fiona McKay, but also any Donovan executives complicit in funneling money to her. Share prices continued to plummet. In a desperate move, Alexander reached out to Elizabeth, requesting a private meeting in a discreet hotel lounge. She agreed partly out of curiosity and partly to finalize any remaining loose ends. When she arrived, she found Alexander seated alone, nursing a drink. Dark circles underlined his once piercing grey eyes, and his posture sagged. Gone was the man who exuded unshakable confidence. Now he was a figure of muted desperation. "I need your help," he began, voice strained. "You know these allegations of misuse with Fiona. The board thinks I'm complicit. If you could just make a public statement, say that Donovan Enterprises has always treated you well." Elizabeth stared at him, stunned by his audacity. "You want me to lie," she said, her voice wavering between shock and anger. "To pretend that you haven't publicly humiliated me, that you didn't abandon me while I was pregnant, that you weren't openly parading your mistress around." Alexander's hand tightened around his glass. "It's not like that," he insisted, though his eyes flickered with guilt. "We're talking about the company. Our child's future depends on its stability." She felt a surge of righteous anger. "You don't get to invoke our child now. Where was this concern when you tossed me aside for Fiona's silence, stretched thick with unspoken regrets?" Finally, Alexander bowed his head, the tension in his shoulders deflating. "I made mistakes," he whispered. "Big ones." Elizabeth swallowed hard memories of their wedding day and all the shattered promises flooding her mind. For a moment, she thought she saw genuine remorse in him. But it was too late. The damage he'd done both to her heart and to his own legacy was irreversible. "I'm sorry," she said, shaking her head. "I won't defend you publicly. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I won't jeopardize my own reputation to salvage yours." Alexander closed his eyes, an expression of defeat etched on his face. Elizabeth stood, feeling a complex tangle of emotions: pity, anger, sadness. Once she had loved him, envisioned a lifetime by his side. Now she saw only a broken man who had destroyed the very things he once claimed to cherish. She left the lounge without a backward glance. Days later, news broke that Alexander Donovan was temporarily removed as CEO pending further investigation. Tabloid headlines screamed variations of "The Fall of a Titan" and "Cold Millionaire Ousted." Financial analysts speculated about a possible takeover, and many suspected Damon Blackwood was waiting in the wings, poised to buy up Donovan assets at a bargain. As for Fiona McKay, her once lustrous brand collapsed under the weight of lawsuits. Rumors placed her in Europe, dodging process servers and trying to salvage what remained of her reputation. The tabloid swiftly moved on to the next scandal, leaving her a footnote in the cautionary tale of hubris and greed. Amid this upheaval, Elizabeth quietly gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Gabriel, a nod to hope and new beginnings. Surrounded by Amanda Harriet and a few close friends, she felt a profound sense of calm when she first held him in her arms. All the betrayal, the public scrutiny, the heartbreak, it faded to the background in the face of her child's tiny heartbeat and peaceful slumber. Alexander, embroiled in corporate and legal battles, sent only a terse, congratulatory message. He did not visit, and Elizabeth, cradling her newborn, felt relief more than disappointment. She was free to chart her son's future without the shadow of a broken marriage. Days later, Damon Blackwood arrived at the hospital with flowers and a promise that he would always be an ally should she ever need help. It was not a grand declaration of love, nor did Elizabeth want it to be. She was content to take things one step at a time, focusing on her recovery and the fragile life she now protected. If Damon chose to remain a friend, or more, that was a decision for the future. Over the following months, Elizabeth found an unexpected contentment in motherhood. She moved into a comfortable townhouse in a quieter neighborhood, away from paparazzi lenses. Harriet ensured her settlement was secure, allowing Elizabeth to provide for Gabriel without ever worrying about Alexander's approval. She accepted a consulting role in Damon's company, on her terms part-time, helping him with public relations and philanthropic initiatives. It gave her a sense of independence that she had once believed was forever out of reach. In the end, the cold millionaire who had discarded his pregnant wife was left with a tarnished empire and a legacy forever stained by betrayal. His mistress had vanished from the scene, his high-powered allies evaporated when the scandals hit, and his board all but pushed him to the sidelines. The city that once bowed at his feet whispered cautionary tales of how arrogance and cruelty could topple even the mightiest. And Elizabeth? She carried on with strength and poise. She never knew she possessed proof that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in the love and courage that survived life's darkest trials. She had found her voice, her autonomy, and most importantly, a future that belonged to her and her son, no longer shackled by the cruelty of a heartless millionaire. Thank you for joining us on this tumultuous journey of love, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. Elizabeth's trials remind us that no fortress, no matter how heavily fortified by wealth, can withstand the destructive forces of cruelty and deceit. Even as Alexander Donovan's empire crumbled under the weight of his own heartless choices, Elizabeth emerged stronger and more determined to create a life defined by resilience, compassion, and hope for her child. Her alliance with Damon Blackwood proved that unexpected friendships can bloom in the midst of turmoil, and her refusal to be silenced laid bare a universal truth: justice has a way of prevailing, even when all seems lost. If this gripping tale of shattered vows and hard-won triumph resonated with you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Share this story with anyone who might need inspiration, and stay tuned for more dramatic, real-life narratives that showcase the power of courage over adversity.